Okay, so it's my second week as a Lord, and we're standing outside the House of Lords from my report back. I'm anxious because I'm still not over the nerves of having just done my maiden speech, where I was in such a state of terror. It's a miracle I got any words out. But anyway, I made my maiden speech, and I made it clear that I would be answerable to all of the people who voted for me as a Brexit Party MEP, but also to the millions of people who said that they wanted more control over their lives, and I mean that. So I know it's not democracy, I know I'm not formally accountable, but you can hold me to my words. The maiden speech was fine, and I really wanted to make a point about free speech, and I did. But there's a convention, there's all these conventions in the Lords. I can't get used to them at all. But anyway, one of the conventions is that straight after somebody's done a maiden speech, everybody after that congratulates them. And the first person who spoke after me was Lord Moylan, a Conservative Brexiteer, and he made a fantastic, very generous contribution about me before he made his own points. And others at least welcomed me to the House. I just think that people should know that nobody from the Labour Party did that. They broke convention in order to behave in what can only be described as a sectarian way. I mean, I don't mind, I'm just telling you. And it also matters because when I actually received the ermine and was introduced, they did the same. So I think it's worth noting that the sectarianism of politics can be, it's designed to humiliate and bully you. It has that effect, but it actually makes me just realise that I don't care what parties people are in. I'm interested in the content of what they say. I say sectarianism because I think it's very important for people to also know that two of the people who made a real effort to talk to me in the tea room, because I have not been universally welcomed, let's be honest, were Lords Morrow and Hay, and they are Lords representing the DUP. And wasn't that generous of them and kind in the circumstances? Everybody will understand that there is a bit of an issue. And they made a point of saying welcome. And they said, on Brexit, we agree and you're welcome here. And, you know, we're all outsiders too. And that was very kind of them. Also, I went to see Nigel Dodds, who's become a Lord. I went to see his introduction, Nigel Dodds from the DUP. And he and I afterwards also had a chat. And he was, again, very generous, very welcoming, as I was welcoming him. In other words, some of the old political labels just don't work. And whilst I'm in the Lords, I don't care what parties people are in. I listen carefully to what they say. And I wanted to particularly mention the Minister, Lord Bethell, who actually was very kind about my maiden speech at the end and said that he thought that I was a free spirit and that I'd liven the place up, and that's my intention. I also have voted for the first time. I voted in this instance with the government on the Internal Markets Bill. It's quite exciting voting. You have to use a voting app, and I did it, which was a big success. But I voted with the government on that one. I won't always be voting with the Tories by any stretch of the imagination. But I sat through the Internal Markets Bill yesterday. It's been all over the news. There was hundreds of speakers, and I just was listening. Actually, I heard some of the best speeches that I've ever heard in my life, some of the most inspiring speeches on the rule of law. I mean, utterly stirring, hair on the back of your neck standing up and so on and so forth. But they were in support of Lord Judge's amendment, which effectively accused the government of breaking the law and made an emphasis of saying that we had to retain the rule of law. Now, forgive me for being cynical, despite the absolute brilliance of those speeches and the erudition that I heard. Not one of those people had made similar speeches in relation to all of the laws that have been brought in relation to coronavirus. In fact, most of them have been arguing for more tighter restrictions that I think slap the face of the rule of law myself. There's been huge problems with the way legislation and regulations have been brought in with not enough scrutiny, and certainly with no complaints about the fact that it tramples over civil liberties. So for all this fine rhetoric of saying we can't break international law, apparently domestic law doesn't matter. And it also doesn't seem to matter that when it comes to Brexit, you can make fine speeches about the rule of law, but if it's not Brexit, you don't bother worrying about it. So I think it's worth noting those things. My final feedback was that there was two really fine questions. You get question time in the morning and people get a minute's question to a minister. And there were two great questions yesterday. One was by Baroness Deitch on statues and arguing that there should be much more nuance and given to our understanding of history. We shouldn't be just pulling them down. All of these commissions that are rewriting history needs to be looked at. And also Lord Hunt, who I don't normally agree with on many things, but who raised a question about the Gender Recognition Act and particularly emphasised the fact that free speech was under threat, that women's only spaces had caused a huge amount of controversy, but that people were being bullied for saying so. And I thought it was very brave that he raised that question. It's interesting, in the supplementary answers that followed those two questions, I realised that the House of Lords is very, how can I say it, woke. It is no different to anywhere else. The majority of people who spoke on statues were, suitably bring them down. We need news to, nothing that you wouldn't have heard everywhere else. And on the GRA, I'm afraid that I didn't feel consoled that there was many people in there who weren't going to be part of the problem in terms of having a proper discussion about the trans issue. One thing I want to say is that Lord Hunt made it very clear that he was absolutely for respecting trans people. But it was trans activists that the issue was with, and I think that's an important difference to make. So now I've spoken in my maiden speech, now I understand the question time. I have now had the courage to go and put in that I'm going to apply to speak on lots of supplementary questions between now and the next month. So I've started. We'll see what happens. In a way, it's a relief to have got the maiden speech done, because speaking's what I'm good at. That's what I'll be doing.